Our planet is a planet of the humans. We are the dominant species, and we have arisen so through evolution and through spreading throughout this wonderful globe. We have tamed animals, probably not them, and we have made our impact well known. Let's look at this last lecture series, The Dawn of the Planet of the Humans. So first, be able to list and define traits that open new niches for the genus Homo. List and compare different human species based on morphology. We're covering 3. List and compare the hypotheses of human evolution and movement throughout the globe. First off, what is human? So the human is the Homo genus, or is it the Homo sapiens? There once was a group of humans known as Homo floresiensis, which lived on a small island in Indonesia. They actually were reduced in stature and have been called hobbits by many. Were they humans, or were they just an offshoot of Homo habilis? Homo erectus. Well, what makes us? Let's see. We have several synapomorphies that are distinct to our genus. So first of the synapomorphies is an erect posture. We are the mammal that walks on 2 legs. Diogenes called us a biped without feathers. Oh no, that was Aristotle. Diogenes was the one who brought in a plucked chicken and said, "Behold, a man." But we have a large brain case, whereas that chicken did not. But it did allow Diogenes and Aristotle to think about what are humans and to compare and contrast and make jokes. We have the ability to make tools. Not just to use found objects as tools, but to make tools and come up with a design for tools. We are able to use fire. We are able to use fire aggressively. We are able to use the subcomponents of fire to make combustion engines. And of course, language. Although other animals have been seen to have language, our very complex language and our very distinct number of languages are somewhat different than that of, say, a raven. Now, humans also, we know, evolved in Eastern Africa. So, first one we're going to look at is Homo erectus. Homo erectus was this early human species. They had a variable skull and body form based on a whole bunch of different fossils. So this is a relatively common type of hominid. So they are African in origin, and they were found in Africa, Europe, and Asia. So what are some of these traits here? Well, we know they used tools. We know they had fire. And we know they were very successful and really went everywhere. We found their stones in many places. We could actually divide it into 3 species, being Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, and Homo heidelbergensis. So they may have been one. In fact, some people would even say Homo sapiens could be lumped in with Homo erectus. And this is where it's beneficial to be the ones making the maps, making the phylogenies, because we say no. And because we say no, it's no. Because who's going to argue with us? But they had variable brain sizes as well. Their skull kind of resembles a hamburger bun, if you think about it, without the meat inside, of course. They had wisdom teeth, which are the last to erupt. So in chimps, the canines are last. But in Homo erectus, as in us, the wisdom teeth were coming in last. We believe, but cannot know for sure, that they were less hairy than most apes. Again, we have the fossils of their skulls and of their other bones. But we don't have fossils of their hair and of their skin. We don't have hides of these all around. We do believe, due to some of the genes and some of the areas they lived, that the skin color may have varied. I mean, they did live away from Africa in various places for lengthy periods of time. So if Homo sapiens can develop such traits, it makes sense that Homo erectus probably would have developed such traits as well. By the way, we do know that skin color varies within chimps, too. So that's possible as well, under the fur. Here's the range. So this is a group that dispersed very well. They got out of Africa. We know they came from Africa and they went to places like Spain, like Britain, like Indonesia. They probably crossed land bridges into Indonesia. They didn't explore much farther than that, though. So that's their range. They're mostly tropical, subtropical. Some, you see them in England, but remember, England is warmer because of the Gulf Stream. No Irish ones known as of yet, but anyway, so that's where they were. And some tools that they made were these Acheulean hand axes. This is actually, they would find a certain type of rock. So they knew to look for chert. They'd find the chert, and they would chip it with a certain pattern. This is a longer term construction than what a chimpanzee will do if it makes a tool out of a stick to fish for termites. And there's a common pattern of chipping stone, which implies that in the mind, was I know what I'm looking for. That in the mind was I know what type of rock to look for. And that in the mind was the ability to come up with this, plan this, see this, and begin it from an abstract sense. And that abstract thought is taking a lot of brain power, which of course a lot of brain power is going to require a lot of nutrients. So we know these were creatures that were meat eating, they were berry eating, intelligent creatures doing a lot. The problem with this, of course, is they didn't advance very far beyond these tools. Whereas we're always getting a new type of drill, they never really went beyond Acheulean hand axes. And you find quarries of these, so they may have had some sort of industry where they're making these and dispersing them. If you find a good spot with a lot of these hand axes, why not trade them for meat? We don't know if they did or not. We don't know. There is a lot about Homo erectus that we simply don't know. And then there are two subspecies, or maybe not. So they're probably different. There's a lot different between Homo erectus and Homo ergaster. There's a lot difference between Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. Or maybe it's not a lot. I mean, it really depends. It's personal preference here. Until there's more evidence, I'm not actually making students memorize differences between these species or subspecies, unless we actually have a class on human evolution, which this is most certainly not. Next, we have the Neanderthals. So Homo neanderthalensis. I'm just going to write down Neanderthal. First found in the Neander Valley of France, Germany, somewhere around there. We call him Neanderthal man, and some of its features, first off, it's got these distinct brow ridges. So we tend to put that idea with lower intelligence. Hold on. It has a bulge at the rear of the skull that is distinct among Homo neanderthalensis. It's got swellings in the nasal passage bones. What this actually enabled them to do was enabled to cool down air as they exhale slightly better, to lose less heat, and warm up air more efficiently as they began to take in heat. So these were Ice Age humans made for Ice Age locations. They had broad tips on their fingers, and they had a very barrel-like chest, very strong bones, and also very dense bones elsewhere in their body. They had a very specific, as I mentioned, niche. And we know they existed from 200,000 to 28,000 years ago in both Europe and Asia. They existed in Israel before the Israelites. Their brain was larger than humans. Full stop. But they had less frontal lobe. Sometimes we know from other classes that the frontal lobe has to do with planning, decision-making, and what's the other word I wrote down here? Personality. So personality traits are all in that frontal lobe. And I see here we are. I'm the type of person who remembers best by writing. I recognize I'm the best by I memorize best by writing. I plan that I'm going to give this lecture from home. At work, I look up in the book where something is for frontal lobe, and then I write down planning there to help me make that plan, or to help me talk later on. And that's my decisions that I've made. All that was actually frontal lobe stuff. So we're thinking the difference between Neanderthal man and Homo sapiens, the advance of the prefrontal lobe is a lot of this intellectual, heady stuff. They buried their dead. They used fire. They wore clothing. They used tools. They did not, as far as we know, make art. There's a difference right there. They did not, as far as we know, have culture. Well, they might have had some culture, but we don't see them using many religious icons and stuff like that. Whereas Homo sapiens, we do see them with religious stuff. I think there's a painting's actually from Homo sapiens, or could have been Neanderthal. Sometimes we kind of blur this because they were both cavemen. They both used caves. We still use caves. Caves are warm during the winter. They coexisted with Homo sapiens, but they were replaced by Homo sapiens around 40,000 years ago. And then there was one. Then there was only Homo sapiens. Now, it has a smaller brain case than the Neanderthal, but the frontal lobe, as I said, much more defined. Has a bit more fine balance when it comes to the ear bones, allowing them to do more spear throwing and less spear thrusting. That does matter. And a real emphasis in this species on culture, on personality, on in-group, out-group, on art, on tattoos, painting the body, painting your surroundings. The language development is not just for utilitarian purposes, but for the sheer love of the game. Think of how many different phrases I use that you wouldn't understand 20 years ago. I say love of the game. Do you think people understood love of the game in the 1950s? Is that a saying? We have a large amount of language development. We really think things through and continually change our slang and, of course, our memes. So where do we come from? This is a good question with some very important implications. So there are three theories we want to cover. The first one is called the African replacement theory. The African replacement theory states that we had Homo erectus left Africa, Homo heidelbergensis left Africa, and turned into the Neanderthalensis species and the Homo sapiens species. Homo ergaster was in Africa. Homo sapiens came out and replaced Homo ergaster in Africa, replaced Homo erectus in Africa, replaced any heidelbergensis exists in Africa, went to Europe, replaced Neanderthals there, went to Asia, replaced erectus there, went to Oceania, replaced the erectus there, and went to America, and it's free real estate. So the other one is the hybridization and assimilation. And that idea is that Homo sapiens left Africa and then hybridized with Neanderthals and hybridized with erectus. That these were close enough to mate with, close enough to produce offspring with, might have been the same species. There are people arguing that. And they just kind of assimilated those other groups. That the Homo sapiens just happened to, the gene pool from Homo sapiens flooded out everything else. Then you've got this one, and watch it. Multi-regional. This is the idea that Homo erectus left Africa, went to Oceania, Asia, Europe, and Africa, and that Africans are actually evolved from a very different line than Asians, and that these are very different groups, and that they really have diverged over evolutionary time, stating that Africans and Asians are much more different, even, than Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. This multi-regional evolution thing, I'm going to throw it out right now, and I'm just going to say this is pretty darn racist, actually. It leads to a lot of racist ideas. So we know full well, as we also know, we're going to cover why, it ain't true. So here's the out of Africa genome, and this is really what supports it. So we see the most recent common ancestor of all humans, and we see an early branch off, and that is the San people. So the San people are located now in Namibia and South Africa, so the very southern tip. And they actually got driven out by some other more recent African peoples. You can trace African history and see they actually got moved around a bit. We see a whole bunch more African variants of the Homo sapiens species, and then we see one group, or two groups, left Africa in two distinct waves, one of which went over to Europe, the other went to Asia, and let's face it, they went all around afterwards. So there's a lot of breeding around. There would be the Hebrews going back into Egypt. There would be Genghis Khan moving into Europe. There would be Europeans colonizing India. The same species. They're just moving around a lot. But we see this early movement out of Africa comes from an ancestral African population. And that's what the genome seems to suggest and our genetic heritage suggests. However, it's not just replacement. There could have been some hybridization. And what we look for there is some traits that are very specific to some group. And one of those is the Denisovian traits. The Denisovian traits can be seen in the Melanesian humans, and they can be seen in some populations of the Asian populations. Tibetan, I believe, is actually, they have a certain Denisovian gene, that allele, that actually allows them to function better at high elevation. So I think it's a blood thing. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it allows humans in that area to function better. But it also comes from the fossils in that area. So it's probable that those are some Homo sapiens that encountered Homo erectus and interbred. The gene pool kind of got swamped out, and it's almost all Homo sapiens now, but some good genes stayed. Neanderthal DNA is almost certainly in Asian and European and Melanesian genomes. Yeah, it's there, almost certainly. And it seems that the Homo sapiens were just the more successful subspecies there. And I say subspecies because they produced viable fertile offspring. So it's called leaky replacement. It's where we replaced the previous humans, but there was some breeding going on too, which really suggests we never replaced another species of humans. We simply took out other subpopulations of humans, and that the one species goes all the way back to erectus, that Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. If they can breed and produce viable fertile offspring, there you go. It's a fair question, and you get some hybrids in there. So some of your genes may have come from Neanderthals. No worries. So what was our ancestor? So many populations of Homo sapiens were erectus, where Homo sapiens arrived. Gene field was probably not the highest. So there may have been some staying away and then some Romeo and Juliet things going on. Some traits still survive from other Homo species. We know that Australian Aborigines have heavier brow ridges. Whatever the origins, humans are one species. Humans are incredibly related. Humans are currently moving around the globe on planes, getting married in different continents and such. There's no such thing as more or less human at this stage in history, which is an important thing because when we define what is human, it's really Homo sapiens. There's only one species currently, and we are all very, very closely related. So what does fire and tool use have to do with skull structure? Think it through. Think about the growth of the brain and the nutrients it requires. What human species have the largest cranial capacity? Don't look in the mirror there, unless you're looking at some older genes. And where do all Homo sapiens species come from? I want to leave you with this. When I was in school, I was taught that having darker skin was a secondary adaptation to living in warmer climates, where there's more sun. Humans came from Africa. Light skin is the mutation. Light skin is the adaptation. The original humans had dark skin. So when we teach, and I've seen still this is taught in high school, that the darker skin evolved second. No, that's whitewashing our heritage. We are African. We all came out of Africa. We may have replaced some previous species, interbred with them, but we all share a common ancestor.